Will won. All right. We're gonna go ahead and start this meeting at 1:05.
She was honking at me.
Okay, I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. Today we're gonna continue the review of the draft outline. There's a second version now available, which made a few updates. I was able to speak with Jennifer Smith last week and made a couple of updates. We can go through all of them, but let's go ahead and get to our agenda. After we just kind of wrapped up the welcome, we'll go through the roll call of task force members, then consideration of minutes from November 27th, and as well as consideration of minutes from January 8th. Then we can go through a quick review of some of those couple little changes that I've made, really minor stuff to the outline you guys saw at the last meeting. Then we'll dive into our review of general requirements for all cannabis activities. If you noticed on the title slide, I'll go back one. I put it down as part 1 because I think this general requirements review is gonna be a 2 or 3 part meeting. It's kind of what it's shaping up to be. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to roll call. Ruby, I'll go ahead and let you take this.
William Wines.
Here.
Catherine Vanderwall. Here. Rebecca Harper. Here. Jennifer Smith. Currently present. Nora Delvaca. Present. Robert Geary. Not currently present. And then Fire District Representative.
Always.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Ruby. Now to move on to consideration of minutes from the November 27th, 2023 meeting and January.
On her way, we should wait a couple minutes so that we don't have to postpone doing this since we will have a quorum to approve them.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll just give it a minute.
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I'm gonna go ahead and make a quick correction. Should be 2024. Okay, that didn't take long.
We are on consideration of minutes from November 27th. Great, so now that we're almost a complete body, give everybody a minute to see if the task force has any questions on the minutes from November 27th. No questions? Are there any hands raised in the Zoom, Andrew? I don't see any raised, so we'll bring it back to the task force for action on November 27th, 2023 minutes.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. There are no hands raised. So
Thank you. Awesome. So that's Nara and Rebecca. First a motion and second. All those in favor? Aye. Is there anyone opposed? All right, that passes. Next, we'll do minutes of January 8th, 2024 task force minutes. Does the task force have any questions? Seeing none, are there any hands raised in the Zoom?
we do have one hand raised in the Zoom room. Holly Harris, go ahead.
Go ahead, Holly. All right, Holly, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, sorry, the button wasn't there till just then. I just had a question. Under the Planning Commission update, is there a specific reason why it says that County Council will present a presentation on county policies regarding gratuities? Does that have any relevance here?
Not really. It was just an update that I gave.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
And he did it. It was great. It's important. We're going to have that regularly, well, at least annually, just to make sure that all of our deciding bodies are kind of kept up to speed with our policies. We're kind of doing this in preparation because we do anticipate the state launching a number of audits of counties that are doing cannabis permits. And so we want to make sure that we're a little ahead of the game to be teaching and continually spreading that message to our decision-making bodies about what's good and what can get you into trouble. Okay, any other hand raised in the Zoom? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the task force for action. Not everybody at once, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the January 8th.
Great.
Yes.
Second.
Second, so Catherine and Will. All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, I'm abstaining. Nara is abstaining. Very good. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, moving on. We are back here at this slide. It probably looks familiar, but a little bit different. This was kind of our outline of the ordinance over the past year and a half. Updated now that we have a new official draft ordinance. It reflects a lot of what we've done, what we'll be doing today, and what needs to be done here in the future. Just a heads up on this, as you may have seen in the attachment that Ruby sent out, today we're really going to be covering county permit requirements, state license requirements, business entity requirements, property owner's approval, background checks and clearances, and then activity records. We did get a comment this morning from Margot getting into tracking water use. And I think, when we're looking at the overall general requirements, we're going to need to touch upon it either at the next meeting or even a follow-up meeting to cover it all. But I didn't want to throw out too much or more than we could get through in one meeting for the time being. So once we get through some of these, if there's some time left over, we can start to touch upon some of these other issues such as track and trace, weights and measures, compliance monitoring, annual reports and inspections, complaint records, as well as identification of emergency contacts. And as we move forward, keep in mind, this is just a reorganization of what's already in the ordinance. We're going to revisit what's there over the course of today and the next meeting, and possibly into 2 meetings from now. We can choose to add what we feel necessary, what you, the deciding body, feels necessary to add to the general requirements before we then go on to restrictions and prohibited activities, including prohibited activities, protection of minors and exclusion zones, then on to development standards, performance standards, and administrative processes and procedures. And then also we do need at some point to touch upon the personal and medicinal use, but it's kind of low on the priority list. With that said,
So just for a little bit of context also for anyone who's joining us for the first time, the board will take a look at the task force recommendations regarding the types of cannabis businesses, zoning districts, and permit level, I think on February 6th meeting. So we are just, right now, the task force is just starting to work on things that will be standard regardless of which businesses the board decides that they want to entertain in the future that or to add to the draft ordinance. So the stuff that we're working on right now is very general.
All right, thank you, Maria. Good point. That's pretty much all covered here. So we've already gone through it with our recommendations, and as Maria mentioned, we're just waiting for that final decision. Hopefully, it can be addressed in one meeting with the Board of Supervisors. Okay, and with that said, for the rest of the presentation, we'll make it available. But it's basically, I kept in the slides from the previous meeting, but rather than go through those slides, figured it would be more beneficial to bring in the PDF document and we can start reviewing it. So are you guys able to see this draft outline?
Yes.
All right. Is it too small or should we zoom in a little? we can make it a little bit bigger.
I mean, it's pretty visible. It's
Okay.
definitely readable.
Good to know. Okay, as mentioned, we've already gone through our purpose, applicability, and uses. These are the different items that we're waiting for feedback from the Board of Supervisors and why we wait. We can go on to general requirements for all cannabis activities. I guess on the agenda, there was also just an overall outline update after discussing it with the Lake County Cannabis Alliance. Few changes that we'll get to, and I'm just going to scroll down to them, is kind of getting into exclusion zones. While they were listed as just overall general exclusion zones, we should start to consider, when we get to that, to look into specific cultivation exclusion zones, retail exclusion zones, processing and distribution, and the other cannabis activities. I think it goes on to the next page. Furthermore, when we get into development standards, what wasn't on the previous outline is getting into all of the county combining district development standards. We can add to this list. I know one issue that we've dealt with that we're waiting for a new ordinance to provide clarification on would be our scenic combining district, but there are a handful of other combining districts. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with the combining district, we have our base zoning districts, R1, R2, residential, commercial, industrial. But then within each of those base zoning districts, we've got a whole series of combining districts. There are other kind of use restrictions and standards that can fall and overlap with our base zoning districts. So whenever you look up a parcel on the county parcel viewer, you'll see the base zoning district, then a list of dashes to like SC or WW waterway, watercourse. So flood French, there's a handful of others that we should look into. We will get to those eventually, but just highlighting the changes because as we know from the previous table, they all kind of start to blur together at a certain point. So making sure that we know what's changed and we're keeping good track of all of that. Another issue with our addition, I should say, to the specific performance standards would be to get into different uses that are specific to each cannabis activity. For example, for now, I just put in hours of operation. We can anticipate that these lists will grow and these specific performance standards will kind of be catered to every individual use. A good example of that would be a lot of the fire code stuff that we've got into here. These are just listed as general, but a lot of it's really specific to volatile manufacturing. Anyway, let's go on to the general requirements for all cannabis activities, starting at the top. Now, currently, if you remember from last week in the way that things were kind of color-coded and rearranged and highlighted and put into these new sections, we also had a list on there for general requirements, county permit requirements. However, Article 27, Section 13, subsection AT, which covers commercial cannabis activities, they don't really go into a whole lot of detail about how use permits also need to meet the requirements of the other articles within the ordinance. So for now, I'll just list these out. And then once I wrap up this brief presentation, we can open it up for further discussion. But they include Article 41, general performance standards, Article 49, the requirements to obtain a zoning permit, Article 50, requirements to obtain a minor use permit, Article 51, which looks a lot like Article 50, just the differences between major and minor. Article 54 for design review permits, which design review is one of those combining districts that apply to certain parcels. Article 55 on applications, that's really where we get into some of our application requirements. And especially when we get into the requirements for the site plan submitted, there's already a list of what all site plans should include. Our current ordinance goes a little above and beyond into specific requirements for cannabis projects. And finally, Article 56, development review permits. So design review and development review apply to various parcels individually. As always, we always look at the Lake County General Plan. Currently, it is from 2008, but thanks to Maria and all the work she's been doing, she has us on track for a new general plan, as well as community area plan updates. So that is something to discuss as how, in terms of how those are evolving on their own path while this is happening and just try to make sure that they stay coordinated. And then as everyone knows, a lot of these projects cannabis have to go through an environmental review under the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. I'll leave it at that for now. We can move on to state license requirements. For now, I just put in the Department of Cannabis control requirements. I didn't really get specific language, but one thing, if you notice, like even in this list over here, they have it listed as Department of Cannabis Control. There's other parts of the ordinance that read Bureau of Cannabis Control, BCC. It used to be a predecessor to the DCC. There's a handful of state organizations that came together as the DCC, which is the primary state agency overseeing cannabis licenses. So in that section, we could get into the real specifics at this time and place. It's like this, but we got to be aware things change over time. DCC, as everyone knows, just updated all of their requirements. So if we keep the language a little broad, we can kind of save ourselves from having to go back and do this again, 5 years from now, just to make sure the ordinance follows those evolving state regulations. Another department to keep in mind here would be the water board, the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. It's quite a long acronym. Moving on in terms of what the current ordinance states in this section, let's kind of move this over here a little bit. Rather than read this out and make for a really boring presentation, was everyone able to review the attachment and kind of look into some of this language, or do we need to dive into it? I'm willing to do whatever you guys think is best.
Is there an attachment that's not part of this agenda packet?
It should be in the agenda packet, I believe. This document here that I'm sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have that.
Mhm.
Okay. So, this is basically just kind of the language that's in our current ordinance in terms of making sure you're compliant with state agencies. Moving on to the next item, business entity requirements. Now, this kind of dives into all the different organizations. If the applicant is other than a natural person, whether it's an LLC or an LP or a trust. I don't really see language on a sole proprietorship, but I guess that's where the natural person, you kind of get the whole idea. But it gets into all these requirements that need to be submitted, need to be done, completed, and then submitted with documentation in terms of their business organizations. I'll leave it towards the open discussion to dive a little deeper if anybody sees fit on this. I can provide some insight from our department's point of view in terms of how we take in this and how we apply this information. Furthermore, we can get into property owner's approval. There is a larger discussion to be had in terms of property owner approval. This is the brief language that's in our ordinance on it. I do know the tax collector's office has, as they're the ones, implementing the collection of cannabis taxes. There might be, I remember hearing some requests to try to require property owners to be listed as co-applicants, because keep in mind, these use permits are tied to the land itself. And we see LLCs and companies come and go, and projects get bought and sold, and, business moves on. But, the use permit, again, once I said it's tied to the land. All right, on to the next item, background checks and background clearances. As we were able to review this, it goes on for a long list of different requirements that our applicants need to go through and submit in order to be eligible, which is basically, proving through a live scan background check that we received from the sheriff's department that they do not have any violent criminal offenses. We do have situations that we see quite often to where some of our applicants have had previous cannabis violations, which they are all now eligible to get expunged. So, just recently we had a project that we were waiting for that item to be submitted to complete. And then all of a sudden, after over 2 years, maybe 3 years, we got the live scan, and we suspect that the applicant was in the process of getting that offense expunged from their record, but now it is clear. All right, on to the next one, activity records. I believe this is the last one, and this is kind of relates to Margot's comment. She's here. She can maybe, when we open up to public comment on this, she can kind of get into the specific concerns about water use and those records and what happens when there's issues with that. But it's kind of, that opens it up to a broader conversation. So, all right, after that, again, the last few items for next week, track and trace, weights and measures, compliance monitoring, annual reports and inspections, complaints and records, and then identification of emergency contacts. So for now, I'm going to wrap up this brief presentation and pass it back to you guys in the room for further discussion. Just let me know if you need me to pull something up or go to a certain section. I'll just go back up to the top of this section for now.
Okay, so for this discussion then, are we asking the task force to say, yes, Article 41 still applies, or?
Well, whether we need to add language, there isn't language in the current cannabis section that says it applies. You've got a point that, I mean, it all applies. So is it redundant to point that out, or is it necessary to point that out? Because from our experience on our side of the counter, the planners know that not every application is aware that they need to make sure that they're meeting all of these requirements. Or should there be a situation where, yes, we've got these basic requirements in Article 41 and Article 49 and 50, but maybe it should be different, a little more specific for cannabis, or maybe not. So there's a discussion point there. But we don't necessarily have to start at this beginning point. If anyone has any concerns over those first few items listed,
What I'd like to see us do, and I don't know if this is just my own idea or if it is part of the task force vision, but best management practices for planning would see cannabis kind of merging in as close as possible to being treated as any other use permit. So I'm hoping that as we move forward with updating this policy, we will only be expanding requirements for cannabis as absolutely necessary, but also be keeping in mind that this is a minor use permit or a major use permit. If there's commercial development, then it's either going to be design review or development review on structures, particularly that applies to like retail. And so when they go through, when any applicant for any business goes through a minor use permit, major use permit, design review, or development review process, we normally do apply all of these general performance standards. So I think we may want to consider going forward, is it something that needs to be addressed in the ordinance, or is it a public outreach? Is it an educational thing? Because like maybe our flyers will be, this is how you get a major use permit. Not necessarily a cannabis one, or we could have two separate ones, because there is still stuff that is cannabis specific. But perhaps we can just have an informational document. Exactly. Yeah, or like a trifold, something that says, hey, you want to get a major use permit. These are the things that you're going to need to think about. And that's where Article 41 would go. But I'm not sure, since we don't usually put it in anywhere else, I'll leave it up to the task force. It's your decision if you think it would be more helpful to have it all spelled out in the actual ordinance. But it's not how we usually do it.
And should you wish to do so, and this is why I held off on doing it at all at this point, should you guys wish that we go in that direction, then by the next meeting we can have something drafted. I can go touch base with county council, and they're the experts on how to put that language together. So
well, let's just,
I think that the goal is to have fewer pages to this, correct? So I think wouldn't the county permit requirements be that, you follow the zoning, you follow the chart to find out if you need a minor or a major.
mm-hmm.
So that's minor or major use permit as required. All these things are as required, correct?
Right. Do y'all even know what's in Article 41? It's not a test.
Oh.
I didn't until I always have to open it. So let me go. Andrew, did you go over what's in 41? If not, I'm just going to read the highlighted sections so that people are aware of what gets covered.
For our general performance standards?
Yeah.
Okay, I can
'Cause I
scroll
have it
down
up right
to
now.
that section. At least what we have at the moment. Performance standards, all right.
No, I mean Article 41.
41.
Oh, the actual article. Okay, yeah, let me go ahead and pull that up here. Give me a second.
Got it. I've got it. I'll go
You
ahead.
got it?
So
Okay, go for it.
it talks about is the purpose of it is to establish performance standards to promote compatibility among various uses of land, protect and enhance the rural resort character of the county, protect the health, safety, or welfare of the community. So that one I'm only emphasizing because that is one of our findings. That's one of the planning commission findings for a minor or major use permit is that the project doesn't endanger or some way negatively impact the health, safety, or welfare of the community. Controls noise, dust, odor, smoke, vibration, danger to life and property, or similar causes likely to create a public nuisance. So then it calls out air quality, electromagnetic interference, erosion control, fire and explosion hazards, glare and heat, has a number of landscaping standards depending on which zoning district we're talking about, as well as even including plant material type, like a canopy tree or an understory tree, an evergreen tree or a shrub, as well as the sizes, minimum plant sizes. Liquid, solid, and hazardous wastes. Noise. This is where it's housed. Whenever people are like, my neighbor driving me crazy, he's making this real loud noise in the evening, and we get a lot of those complaints here, that's where our planners are always going, is Article 41, because it deals with decibel rates at different times of days, and it differs between residential and commercial.
And
It's
those are
also
out there, correct?
Yep. Table.
just
Andrew?
want to add one thing. It's also it can at times from dealing, especially dealing with the public and dealing with neighbors who aren't happy with their cannabis project that's nearby, and then they look at our cannabis ordinance and they're like, "Well, you didn't cover this, you didn't cover that." We get that comment very often, almost on a regular basis. And to say like it's covered, it's just not in that cannabis section. It applies to everyone. So that's where maybe preventing that confusion might be something to consider.
Good point. It goes on to talk about open and outdoor storage, sales, and displays. And again, a lot of this differs according to the zoning district. Oh, radioactivity. Okay. Vibrations, mobile homes regarding permanent offices, restrooms, and then it has a section for cannabis cultivation and or processing. And these. I just had something else. Anyway, it has three subsections in that last section. Prohibiting outdoor cultivation within any mobile home park. Oh, this must have come in when we were dealing with cultivation and multifamily. Yeah. Okay. Prohibited with any property that's improved with multifamily dwellings and processing of medical marijuana, including but not limited to this. Drying, trimming, weighing, packaging, storing for later distribution shall be limited to that amount of medical marijuana that may be cultivated on those premises in compliance with any then existing county ordinance. Okay.
So it sounds like that language could use some update.
Well, yes, I think actually the verbiage, the nomenclature could use some updating. But this specific part we'll probably come back to later because it deals with personal. Like you already couldn't do it virtually.
Personal instead of medical.
Exactly. And if everybody gets their 612 plants, if you're living in an apartment complex, how's that going to get managed, or a mobile home park? So that's what this is talking about. So we'll make sure we come back to that. But other than that, these are standard or general performance standards. So the question is, are there any that I just listed that the task force thinks should not be included or pertain to a cannabis related business?
Because they find everybody, right? Yeah. That's how I feel. I feel like it just needs to say adherence to Article 41. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And then people can go look it up,
Good, and that supports Andrew's point that maybe we need some verbiage in there for a cannabis use permit just to walk them through that.
Yeah.
Okay,
But does that need to be in the actual?
right, that's my question. Does it need to be added into the ordinance, or do we just need to develop an educational pamphlet?
That's what I
Can
feel like.
any-
Or
Yeah.
under the application requirements.
Like as an addendum?
Or just, it's like a, yeah.
Here's your reference
Material.
documents. It says you have to adhere to Article 41 and then, a link to like, here's the reference documents or some other educational piece.
Well, I think that's a good idea too, because if it ever, Article 41 being an example, if it ever gets updated outside of this, if you have them in two different places,
Perfect.
this doesn't get updated, now you have an argument point for somebody coming up to the counter, I followed this, not that.
Good point, good point.
Referring back is always.
And so we gotta be updated once it says refer back to Article 41, you go there. If it's updated, it's updated. If it's not like you have two conflicting
Or even
documents.
general performance standards in case you end up with a renumbering.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
41 becomes something else.
absolutely.
That's not likely though.
Not likely,
Okay.
no, but I see where you're going. Additionally, with our new electronic permitting software, we should be able to create a checklist for people who are applying that talks about those different those different applicable zoning articles. And that would also, we could also get a link in there to the exact article. So I think that public outreach is really important to know that they're gonna need to conform just like any other use permit. But I think we might actually just be able, we might already have some that are just general, anybody doing a minor or a major use permit. I'm not sure, we'll check. Make a little note about that. Okay, Andrew, do you have anything further from 41?
No, not 41. So I
All
think
right,
we're good on radioactivity. So
Yeah, good. I think we should really keep that in there. So 49, 50, and 51 are just the processes regarding public hearing requirements, findings required for approval on zoning permits, minors, and major use permits. So this is all kind of procedural information. It also covers a little bit about expiration or revocation, though most of that is actually in a different part of the zoning ordinance.
Similar to Article 41, would you want to maybe kind of touch upon Article 55
Sure.
for applications and what they require for any type of use permit application? So
I'm sorry, can we go back to Article 54? Is the design
Yeah,
review permit the same in general for cannabis as it would be for any other project?
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
And let's see. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just a general planning thing. Some of our zones, if you click on some of the parcels in the commercial areas, they'll have DR. And I
Yes.
think that is design review, right? And anything that doesn't have a design review that is commercial gets a development review, right? Even though it doesn't have DR on it.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be my understanding so far from my experience, especially with any commercial cannabis operation. They've all been pointed in the design review direction. So
Good. So design review will help ensure aesthetic compatibility between uses in community business districts and along designated scenic corridors where the design review combining district is applied. I think that is also a discretionary permit as opposed to development review, which is a more of a ministerial permit. And development review is supposed to go to the development review committee, which we don't have one. The planning commission serves as that. And it deals with conditions that are deemed necessary to secure the purposes of the chapter code or other county standards may require tangible guarantees of evidence that such conditions are in being or will be complied with. So development review is more of these are our already existing standards. We just want to verify that you comply with them without the design review permit. It can also be waived by the planning director. And I have done this on a number of occasions where people are going into an existing shopping center, and all they're doing is like changing their signage out. And so because that's a new use, it could require a development review, but it's so minor of a change, I just waive it. Okay, are there any more questions? 55 and 56. Or no, 54 and 56. Yeah, okay, so now let's go to 55 because I think that deserves a little more attention by the task force. Only because our application, this is a general application, Article 55, but we've got application already listed in cannabis specific in Article 27.
Also, keep in mind, we can dive into those details here at this last section, administrative processes and procedures, where we go into application requirements, which is a mirror of Article 55, and then application process and renewal of use permit and so on, expiration, revocation. So
should that be?
I'm going to go down the list of just the general application requirements. And then Andrew, if you could bring up 27 to show what we've got for cannabis, and then we'll see the differences there.
okay.
So it's the regular one, whatever article this one is, 55, has a site plan that's clearly to scale, shows distances, location of existing and proposed structures, walls, fences, any public rights of way, off-street parking, if you're proposing any signs, proposed street dedications and improvements, as well as all easements, and then the location of any infrastructure that could be wells and septic, and then also your landscape plans. And then here it refers to information needed to determine the performance standards of Article 41. So it's already referring back. A request for any amendments to 41, as well as why. Required fees. If you have an agent representing you, as something signed by the property owner that is identifying that agent. Any relation to the hazardous waste, that national database that tells us where those are. And it also has a section for additional information, which could be required, may not be, but usually is depending on the type of project. And that includes soil reports, drainage plans, geologic, hydrologic, seismic investigations, archaeological reports, biological studies, flood hazard reports, market analysis, fiscal impact studies, noise studies, traffic and circulation studies, or anything else that is pertinent and of a technical nature. Of those, that should sound very familiar to cannabis applicants because they usually do have to get, maybe not soils reports, but definitely your drainage has to be identified on your site plan. We require the archaeological and biological. Later on, the board did draft that ordinance that requires now hydrological across the board, not just for cannabis. There was recent use permit for a project over in Blue Lakes, an event center in Blue Lake. We required a noise study for that. So we do try to keep it limited and only request these additional studies as needed.
So then would you have, we're still on applications, right?
Yep.
So then you could have, number 6, Article 55, and then a sub, I don't know what the word would be.
And say everything in Article 55 and
include those things right up front with the county permit information.
Yeah, what does it say now, Andrew?
That's what it looks like right now. I know.
Well, I had the PowerPoint up to kind of show it's a little all over the place. Everything that's purple here falls into those procedures, application procedures and requirements. It gets into license delays and revocations, which is processed later on. But then permit process, permits, the pre-app list of application requirements. There was early activation language. It's crossed out because we no longer offer early activation, thanks to the help of our task force. And then it gets into the property management plan with air quality, grounds, security, stormwater management, and water use being the primary required sections of that. It goes on to these other sections in purple, but I brought up another document, which I think this here is our application checklist. When we're reviewing an application for completeness, Catherine Schaefer, our current resource planner, and I put this together like about 2 years ago, if not longer. And we had this checklist already. I kind of, when I showed up, I helped clean it up, but we went one step further to really just cite each section of the ordinance and where those requirements were coming from. You can see some of it's not in the Article 27. It is in 55.5 or 55.2E. But we get into background clearance, LLCs, some of the stuff we're already discussing, documentation for notice of applicability. That's a current ordinance. That's the one with the October 30th, 2020 date, as well completion reports, project monthly and annual water use, projected monthly and annual water use, EnviroStar, it goes on. I believe we shared this with the task force at one point in the past, but I'd be happy to share it again. And then like in terms of site plans, which Article 55 covers quite a bit, here's where we have our specifics on site plans. Site plan of existing conditions, proposed site plans, cannabis related structures, the location of those, elevation of proposed structures, proposed cultivation area and canopy, all water sources for cultivation activities, all power sources for cultivation activities, 100-foot setbacks for hazardous material storage and or wells from all waterways on or around the project. Now this is an interesting point. We have it listed across the board as a 100-foot setback, but between Fish and Wildlife and the Water Board, they have it broken down into the classifications of the water courses that range from 50 to 100 to 150. So when we get into our setbacks, we again may want to mirror what the state's doing because they are overseeing all of this, parallel to our review of the project.
But isn't the county's worry about from property lines and let the state water board worry about the water board setbacks that we have to adhere to in order to get our water board permit?
We have both in our ordinance. We have 100 foot from the property line, and then it goes on to 100 feet from, I don't have it memorized, but it's like ponds, streams, creeks. It doesn't get into the scientific classifications in the way the state agencies do. They're the experts on this stuff. We just kind of put it in there to make sure we're covered and everything's at least 100 feet away from it. Which we may want to go with just their farthest setback is 150. Maybe to be safe, we just up it to 150, or we use language that points it to the state direction. So that all of these ideas have been floated around for the last 2 years.
I think that's already been changed. If you go back and review, I think it was in 2019. Somewhere along the line, it was changed to mirror the state setbacks.
Okay, I can look into that. 2019 was before my time, but I'll double check to make sure that's there. So, anyway, moving on, security site plans are also in there. Grading and drainage site plans, as Maria was mentioning. Biological and cultural resources site plans, if applicable, as well as plan phase developments, if applicable. Now, when we get a biology report and it says there's nothing of concern, then we don't necessarily require that. But if there is stuff of concern and they need to, through that cooperation and coordination with other agencies looking at it, it's determined that this area needs its own special designation and special setback. That's where we would require those site plans to show that you are doing that. Same with cultural resources. We just keep that information confidential due to its sensitivity. There's cause for.
It's not applicable is if you're like going into retail, an existing structure. But where CEQA is where our projects are looking at undisturbed land or even previously disturbed land, we're going to require biological and cultural.
Well, we require the study in the reports, but not necessarily the site plans. If a special set prepared by the applicant showing what the applicant's going to do, because if there's nothing there to apply it to, then it would be an empty site plan. So. Absolutely.
However, we will never request a public site plan identifying cultural resources. We rely on our talks with the tribes and with the results of the cultural study, because a location of protected areas or sensitive areas is confidential.
So how do you see this working? Because we have to provide those to the state to get our state license. We can't have our local license unless we have our state license. So are you going to do a review on top of the state's review?
I don't understand.
I think it's the other way around. The state is looking, especially with their new annual licenses being the option, they look at local compliance. Have they received the county permit
Yeah,
first?
they're kind of looking at our review, right?
Yeah, especially in our county as we serve as the lead agency and undergo the CEQA
Oh,
analysis.
yeah, it's project specific here. Okay.
Anyway, furthermore, going on into written documents, project description, biological assessment reports required, 2 surveys during the floristic season is in there. However, we might want to follow up on that. It has become a state requirement. I think it was internal policy from a few directors ago that wanted to require that, but we don't have it codified. But if we want to codify it, now's the time to do it, including botanicals as well. Then the archaeological assessment report includes separate site plans, again, as needed. Hydrology reports are also required that cover water availability and recharge rates and cumulative impacts on surrounding area, which is something that Margot brought up, and that's going to be a bigger, longer conversation. In addition to the drought management plan, which includes water use reduction measures. This section especially, the drought management plan, I would like to see it become more robust and specific in what we want from the applicants, because it's a little open and vague. We leave it open and vague, we get open and vague answers. So, and then going on into the property management plan, you could see in the PowerPoint here, let's go back to that slide. In our ordinance, it covers these specific sections. And as you can see, the checklist has evolved a bit to cover air quality, water management, security management, stormwater and erosion control management, site and grounds management, hazardous materials management, grading plans, solid waste disposal, vegetative waste disposal, the growing medium management, energy use, pesticide management or pest management, which kind of ties into the hazardous material, but should also be a separate section, fish and wildlife protection, and then biological and cultural resources mitigation plan, in addition to CAL FIRE 4290 and 4291 SRA requirements. So this is kind of what our current checklist is. We don't have to necessarily solve it all right this minute. I imagine it can't be solved all right this minute, but yeah, we need to start looking at this stuff to make some decisions. So. But with that said, are you guys hearing me? It got real quiet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Digesting.
All right. Well, while that's sinking in, and again, we have a hand raised from the public. Can we open it up?
That checklist would potentially be the place to include that little note on 41. Is that the thought? That it's like.
Yeah, it would come out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all.
All right. Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, hi. Andrew, that checklist that you just showed everybody, it was really, really well put together. And I was wondering if you could actually send that out.
Yeah. We'll get it up on the CDD Cannabis website. I'll work with Ruby to get that. And she can also email it out to everyone. So
Thank you.
Well, perhaps while that is digesting, we can move on to the next section, or if we want to keep the conversation. I mean, one option is bringing this to the table today, having a discussion, getting some direction, bringing it back at the next meeting with, more clarified, I guess, results or documentation from what the task force wants to see. So.
Yeah, so today's agenda only talks about review of general requirements. I'd like to let's just go back to applications. Andrew, pull up that checklist again,
The
please.
PDF checklist, okay.
Because Jennifer talked about in the beginning referring to, no, go back up. Oh, we need to take EA out of there.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
It hasn't been updated in a while, so.
Yeah, good. Site plan.
Is this the location you want to
Go down to
go?
written documents, would you?
Written documents, okay.
So as part of the application, it could start with things that are required by Article 55, which is the site plan and all the things that I started out with, landscape plans. And then, so that's just procedural, but is there anything in here that we think we would not need? Because I'm kind of hard pressed to show anything that would be superfluous in our current list. Cannabis industry folks, what do you think?
And that's,
So just to read it out to people, it includes the bio, the archaeological, or we call them the cultural resource studies, hydrological, drought management plan. And even though Andrew's right, we've gotten like a wide spectrum of drought management plans. Anything that says like, we'll use less water to, we'll use less in these conditions and it will reduce this much and stuff like that. So if we don't flesh that out, I don't anticipate having very useful drought management plans received. And then the rest of them.
So you're saying you want some minimum standards for what that?
I would, yeah, I
have that
totally
for
agree with Andrew.
other activities besides
think
cannabis.
one-
It's more robust for grapes.
No, we don't have a drought management plan because we don't regulate conventional ag.
Okay.
Do you guys?
What about wine?
Nope,
You read
that's
that.
conventional. When you get a use permit for a winery, we're looking at your wastewater management and your stormwater management, but we're not, because we want to look at the water that's getting flushed as they're cleaning, you know, what they're using. But we don't have, drought management plan is specific to cannabis. It's the first time we've had that.
So there's no other developments that you
Nope.
apply that to?
Yeah, even largely, it's really focused. I think I responded to Margot when she made the comment that we focus on water quality a lot more than water rights in that sense.
In your effort to make us more like traditional ag, I would suggest that be removed.
So let's look at that. In the hydrology report, it does write, it does include the availability of the water and how fast it recharges, as well as cumulative impacts. Could that stand alone without a drought management plan? Because we have no way to,
How do you even
It
enforce
we can't
it?
enforce a drought management plan.
It could with a programmatic EIR, which would follow this draft ordinance. We would need that scientific study to have those scientific backed thresholds.
So then it's no longer project specific, so wouldn't need to be in a project
It
application.
would still be project specific. It's
If you go
just
to a
that we'd have
programmatic EIR?
thresholds. Mhm. We'd have, it'd be programmatic, which means that each individual project would still have to show how, or they'd either tier off of it or they'd have to show how they're in compliance. But the benefit of a programmatic EIR is that it actually establishes thresholds of significance, which we don't have right now.
Yeah, that's,
Just brought up the ordinance with the language on drought management plan, just to show you. Hang on. Here. Now, therefore, Board of Supervisors, Section 1, hydrology report prepared by a California licensed civil engineer, hydrologist, or geologist experienced in water resources with approximate amount of water availability for the project's identified water source, approximate recharge rate, and then cumulative impacts of water use to surrounding areas due to the project. Now, this section and then these requirements are the addition to what was already really in the ordinance that was covered by this section. As
So
well
I
as
have
the addition of,
What's the date is? That applies to everything.
that applies to everybody. Yeah, scroll down
Yeah.
to the bottom, Andrew. When was this adopted?
let's see,
2021.
July
Okay.
27th, 2021. I should have known that. I used to have that memorized. So
Let me be more specific. It applies to anyone that requires a land use permit. So conventional ag does not require a land use permit. So right now it is
the
required.
language is here. All projects that require CEQA analysis of water use.
So it doesn't need to be called out exclusively because it's handled in the hydrology report, right?
Not necessarily. No, what I'm saying is this ordinance has established it for anything needing a land use permit. But
With the-
still,
So removing
the
the-
status of where we are now is cannabis is the only cultivation of a plant that requires a land use permit.
Right, but in the checklist, Don't we have drought management plan called out?
We
It's
do
included.
because it's here.
Because
But the
it's-
language in the ordinance says it provide a plan depicting how the applicants plan to reduce water use during a declared drought emergency to ensure both success and decreased impacts on the surrounding areas. That's very open and not very specific.
I'm just
So
saying
that's-
it's included in the hydrology report that you have to provide. So why
It's-
would we
yeah.
have a separate line item?
Well, no, a hydrology report is included, but it doesn't, hydrology reports don't necessarily say how you can,
This isn't the hydrology report part?
Yeah,
no, see,
they're both here. Hydrology report here, drought management plan. Think about this. This is more like baseline conditions when you look at CEQA. What is it? What are we dealing with now in the present moment? And then in the future, when we have issues, what's your plan for the future? That's kind of the way to think of it. You need to really study and look at what you're really dealing with on the ground, and that's everything here. And you got to have a good plan for when things go bad, when we are in drought. So
However, since cannabis is the only cultivation process that requires a land use permit, we could still, if it be the will of the task force, recommend that a drought management plan be exempt, or if you're doing cannabis cultivation.
After the last year's rain, this is the urgency ordinance. It says until the declared drought emergency has expired, I believe, that it's
Not if you live in Lake County.
not right.
Zoning
Require
permit,
CEQA.
ministerial.
So it's, so
We don't do
CEQA.
CEQA on ministerial.
Okay, so that means the exact same plant as it is cannabis sativa is regulated to different ways in terms of the drought and content. That's just something to point out.
your language is here. The urgency ordinance, if approved, shall take effect on all future planning commission considerations until the declared drought emergency has expired, or if the board of supervisors revokes the ordinance. And to this date, I don't believe they've revoked it.
I went through that process with county council when I first got here because I thought, oh, this isn't applicable anymore, but it is.
Nor the only county in the state.
The executive order.
We do have a hand raised in the Zoom room. Margot is.
Okay.
You can't have emergency regulations if in a basin around water use if there's not a declared drought emergency. So if you just declare that we're still in a drought, then you can make emergency regulations. But you can't make them if you're not in a drought emergency. So the governor issued an
Flooding
EO.
every year.
It's a drought emergency.
Okay, that's state. There's mud.
That's it.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind if at certain times the requirements have kind of overstepped what we are allowed to require.
Especially the way certain laws.
Otherwise, the state water board wouldn't have been able to formulate and issue their most recent emergency regulations surrounding information orders on agricultural water use.
Yeah, petition to OAL.
Two petitions. So, okay. Today's the announcement date.
All right.
Ironically.
Well, with that in mind, being in Northern California in a climate that is prone to droughts, whether this 20-year mega drought is still going on or we'll find out in the future, but we can anticipate, there'll be good years and bad years, dry years and wet years. And in those dry years, when there is a drought, there is an opportunity with this ordinance to require a drought management plan, which is not a bad thing to have. I mean, a lot of people are really worried about that stuff, and that's half the reason why we're here figuring it out. So.
So we should take public comment, and we're not able to vote on it today, it's just discussion out of mind.
Correct. We'll bring it back for voting. Is there anybody in the Zoom who wants to talk about this item?
Yes, we have one hand. Margot.
Margo? Sorry. Just a second, Margo.
Just a announcement.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As Andrew pointed out, California is in a multi-year mega drought, and it would be a wise move for the county to be thinking proactively and positioning the county and being a good steward of its precious groundwater. So having a drought plan would be very, very wise. And then the big picture would be preserving the groundwater, period. What are the impacts of groundwater by agriculture? And then maybe the bigger picture is perhaps land usage by all users should be covered by articles and ordinances. I just urge the task force to consider being good stewards of the groundwater. Families depend on it. It's not just for agriculture. And then consider the families who are surrounded now by commercial cannabis cultivators with major use permits. And if they're allowed to exceed their reported water estimated usage, that's going to be an impact. And how is the county going to deal with that when many families are affected? Thank you.
Thanks, Margot. Also, on the conventional ag side, with these recent new requirements for water reporting, are conventional farmers kind of seeing regulations coming their way in the future as well at the state level?
Insofar as the reporting requirements apply for 2024, those regulations are here, not coming. But I think the thought is that a managed situation, whatever that looks like in the future, may or may not require exclusively regulation. It may require other approaches to that same problem. But as for like a cultural shift within farming toward acceptance of greater regulation, I'm sorry to tell you, I haven't seen that.
But
I would not expect it to happen. I was just wondering if you see it coming.
In Mendocino County, because of their SGMA requirements, part of their GSA, they're in the, budgeting and paying for aspect of it right now. So they're looking at like taxing groundwater use in Mendocino County to pay for their GSA. So that's an example of that's happening, not here, but
I have a related thought actually that kind of dovetails on what Margo brought up, but also just around the discussion of today's topics. Properties that were in this past tense, permitted for commercial cannabis production, but that are no longer being used for that purpose. Are the later, unrelated to cannabis uses of those properties being held to similar standards, or are those properties relinquished of those requirements as soon as they are no longer being permitted for cannabis cultivation, et cetera?
So we have use permits issued for cannabis, and just like any other use permit, that does follow the land.
It follows the land.
So regardless of who owns it, if they're operating that use, that use permit applies. It expires with 2 years of non-use, with an exception of those who notify the department to say they're opting out this year or they're reduced. If they opt out, we take that as an example of ongoing use. And so we don't use that as one of the 2 years to make it expire. But
only for that use though.
Correct.
So
once that use permit expires from non-use, then, or even during that time, if somebody's trying to do a different use,
sure,
they're free to do so.
But for example, if someone wanted to just hypothetically dig a well on a property that had been permitted for cannabis use, they would be required to go through a different set of requirements through the state than they would have if they were doing that on any given piece of property that had not been permitted for cannabis use.
Are you stating that, or are you
stating?
Oh, okay.
Come again?
If you sell a property that was permitted for cannabis use, and the landowner of that piece of property pursues a permit to dig a well, they'll have to follow through with a hydrology report as if their purpose on that land was cannabis as opposed to any other residential.
Unless they apply for a change of use permit, right?
Or not.
Well, ours would have to, so far, we don't have a withdrawal process in our ordinance. It just expires after 2 years. And we have encountered this, and it is on our to-do list to bring to the task force for consideration, is some form of voluntary withdrawal or closing it down of the permit, which would be faster than waiting for the 2 years, which is what people have to do right now.
I get a lot of questions outside of this on conversion to hemp, so that's,
I can also touch base with Janae at the water board. I have a meeting with her later this week. She just went through a huge process to terminate a lot of notices of applicability. This NOI requirement, which you can get the full text right up here with that November 30th. People who had, obtain these NOAs, they have to keep paying annual fees. People aren't paying the fees. People aren't using them. They've been in a big process of closing that out. But I can double check with her if that does in fact mean what Will is saying. So,
yeah, I think they expire after a period of time. So we have gotten a few. First, the day when she started doing that, our planners were really busy with phone calls.
yeah,
But I think so. A number of them are already getting them renewed.
okay. Yeah, just because you're not, you don't have to be regulated. Yeah.
Right, right.
So should I go back to the PowerPoint and the outline, or?
I think my whole point that I was trying to just make sure we're not doing is that there's not a separate line item for drought management plan and then this hydrology report.
Right.
Okay. I just don't want to see it listed twice.
It's not twice.
Okay.
The hydrology report tells you your data, and the drought management plan tells you what you're going to do with your data.
Got it. Okay.
So that was put in there because the board wanted it in there. So it's almost like, I almost feel like it's like the same as like Article 41.
But it would pass it around the same time as that well moratorium.
Right.
Where are you going?
Yeah.
For the Board of Supervisors. So it's like this, it was this series of drought related offenses.
But I mean, if it's ever like lifted or like, oh, we don't need this anymore, but then it's gonna still be required for cannabis that's spelled out in the ordinance or in their.
Right, good point. Mm-hmm.
It's almost like I said, like we just did like
We want to refer to that section of the
refer
code.
to that section, right? So it's like, and we're still in a declared drought.
Yeah.
And it's applicable, but.
It does not look like it was codified, because it doesn't say like section this, that, the other of the code shall be amended to read as. It's just a requirement.
So if that's included in Article 73, like Catherine said, then it should be referenced as if applicable, but not actually.
Well, what I'm thinking is maybe we need to codify this in applications. In Article 55. And so it's not strictly a cannabis thing, it's an everybody thing while we have a drought. It's an all land use permit thing, not just specific to cannabis. Right, and then are referring to in the beginning, all the stuff in 55, all those standards would include this.
What you may end up seeing.
Actually, let's put it in general standards. Yeah.
Add the sequence.
You think, yes, so Andrew, you think maybe putting this, or maybe making a recommendation that this ordinance be codified within section 41, Article 41, general standards?
That is, that's one way to go. Let me go back to that PDF here. So here we go. So yeah, one way to go, we could point them in this direction of Article 41. They go to Article 41. There's been an update to include that. If we want to apply it for everybody and not have it a specific, hoop to jump through for just our cannabis growers, or if it is going to stay with just cannabis, we can get down to the end of the outline to.
Yeah, we don't want it to stay just cannabis.
Okay. Administrative process and procedures.
Yes, yes. Yeah, okay, so make note of that, Ruby coming back to take action or consider taking action on a recommendation to move or to codify ordinance number. What number is that, Andrew?
3106. Yeah, 3106.
And the title, can you scroll up to the title? Okay, good. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about cannabis there anyway. So it'll be a recommendation to codify 3106 within Article 41 general standards.
So just a point of clarification, if we were in a declared drought emergency, those requirements would not be required, right?
If we were not in a drought emergency, then this would not apply.
Okay.
When we go into a drought emergency, this would apply to all
Right.
uses that require land use permits only.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would affect, I think it's a use permit, so I'm not sure if it would cover like just a well permit. You know, like Pat Scully was trying to get the well within the Kelsey, that Big Valley water place, and so he had to go to the board. Remember that? That was like a couple months ago. He had to go through extra scrutiny to get an ag well. Because there is that water management plan in the Big Valley area. So I'm not sure if this would apply to that kind of a situation. But I don't know.
And I'm dealing with a pending project where, someone is calling out the part of the initial study for potentially being piecemeal due to the well being drilled prior to the application for the use permit. However, there was a pre-existing cattle ranch. There was an existing agricultural use, and they have every right to drill a well on their property with or without a pending cannabis project. So.
Exactly. Yes, we during an application process for cannabis or for any use permit, we are still able to go forward and permit anything, any sort of development that would not require that use permit in order to take place. So you could still build a house where you're applying to grow cannabis or something like that. And so that would include wells, electricity, septic, stuff like that. All the things that would normally be allowed on that property as a use by right. Okay, where are we, Andrew?
We have a hand raised, Margot.
Cool. Hey, Margot.
Hello, I have a recommendation. It would be it would show a lot of foresight to keep the drought emergency, not the drought emergency, but the drought management plan. I think it'd just be smart, considering the challenges that we've had with water. I'm speaking about the state of California. I think it'd just be smart to keep it and not rely on a declaration. I think it's just smart to be planning. We have a scarce resource being groundwater. So let's think about what would we do if we had circumstances where that water is in short supply. So I just urge you to consider keeping that as a part of regular operations moving forward for all land use. Not just for cannabis, not just for declared drought emergencies, but just standard operations. Thank you.
Thanks, Margo. Okay, what's next,
All right.
Andrew?
Before we move on, I do want to bring up one point. She actually just reminded me of it, that it was a prior discussion that should we decide to keep the drought management plan, to maybe provide a template with what specific information we want out of it. And that could apply to any other requirements, because, we leave it up to the applicants to bring us their stuff, and we'll take a look at it. If we had, kind of set standards or more specific standards. One example, I think with the drought, at the state level, we've got exceptional drought, extreme drought, these various tiers of, the environmental conditions, and maybe perhaps require out of that drought management plan. Okay, when you're in this stage, you're going to do this. When you're that stage, you're going to do that. So just throwing that idea out there because it has been discussed. I remember our supervisors having some robust discussions about it. So, all right, let's go back to the outline. So,
also, I thought I saw Holly's hand.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Holly.
Oh, hi, thanks. First of all, I wanted to say that I totally agree with Margo, and I think it would be beneficial for the county to really look at all users in terms of, what their water usage, a plan for water usage during droughts. So if we don't have a drought, at least we would have that information. But I think even more than that, we need more than just a plan for what one would do, but we need to actually have something in there that says that it will be enabled, maybe something in the conditions of use that say that this will occur if this happens. Anyway, just a thought.
Thanks, Holly. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time, plus we're kicking everyone out at 2:30. So we have 9 minutes because we have another meeting in here at 2:30. 9 minutes, I'm wondering if we're at a good stopping point or if there's something else that we want to take on in the next couple minutes.
Maybe something to plant a seed for our further discussion at the next meeting.
Great.
Because honestly, all of this business requirements, they seem pretty straightforward. I don't know if we really need to touch them too much. And they seem to be working well enough. Especially, it's nice to be able to go at the state level and track an LLC from a permittee that we haven't heard from a long time and see if it's active or not. But background checks and clearances has been another discussion our supervisors have brought up. Where does it stand? Whether it's relevant. I hear a lot of people making the argument to get rid of this section. It's from planning point of view, we can require the live scan, but there are, there's some pretty apparent ways that people can get around this pretty easily, and something to keep in mind for all of our requirements as a planning division and a community development department. We really shouldn't be requiring anything we cannot enforce. So with that, I just want to plant that seed for, thought about to what effect and to what level these background checks are here, and what, given the fact that this industry has a history and a background from an illegal market and it's converting to legal market. I don't know, something to keep in mind.
So just to add on to that, I think that the issue or the inconvenience is having all the employees do background checks. Because if we are the first, the first round before you get to the state, they're going to do those background checks at the state anyway. Why would we have people pay tens of thousands of dollars if they're not going to clear a background check and not get approved? So if it were me, I would keep the background checks for owners of the business, but remove the requirement for employees. Because when you're subcontracting, they're not employees anymore. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a pretty normal way of doing business, like if you're construction or anything else. So so there, I'm planting that seed on top of your seed.
Thank you.
No, that's just reiteration of what I was saying. I've heard from some cultivators who like it because they've had employees that they weren't sure about. They had their own private investor look into it. And if you want to do that as a business, you are free to do that. Walmart may require this and Target may not. I think it really, the operator can make that decision in a lot of ways. So
ongoing in non-cultivation or in any employment situation, it was taking so long to get employee background checks back that it's just as hard to get a job there as it was to get a job in the county. You're sitting around waiting around forever. And by then your employees got a new job.
You actually never even hear back about it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So it's like, I just send people over, they get approved. I don't even know if they're approved, not approved, nothing.
Interesting.
Every 2 years. $150 a person.
Fingerprints or something else?
Yeah, it's a big
Life scan. You have full life scan.
Yeah, you have to go out.
But it
Every
goes through DOJ and
Superfund
it also
harvest.
goes through Homeland Security. And we do it too for. Plus, you shouldn't have to get them redone, because what Sheriff Martin told the board one day at a board meeting was that once you get it done, then if you ever do anything in the future, the sheriff's office gets notified.
Flags.
So you should not have to renew it. Not
But
that
if
you need
you
a double check.
you have to renew it in a lot of industries that require. If you work at a school, you have to have it done every 5 years.
We do it
Really?
by the contractor.
Every 5 years?
I don't know.
If you want to drive a van of kids to volleyball, right? You have to have a life scan done. And then if you haven't driven or been involved with school in 5 years, they make you do it again.
Interesting.
Okay. What if you've been active that whole time in that?
They
5
still
years?
make you do it again.
Even if you just volunteer.
Well, that kind of disagrees, that kind of contradicts what the sheriff.
It's for every school or every league. It's like they can't check it and see that you.
No, because everybody has their own OID number.
Yeah.
So we have situations where the cannabis department can check it, but they can't share the results with the sheriff. Sheriff has to request it on.
Yep.
That's annoying.
Yeah. So, what are the steps towards getting to a spot where we can start voting on this stuff and moving it forward rather than just reviewing?
We're going to reword the agenda. Thank you. So that we can discuss and vote at the same time.
And another question, if we are reviewing specific articles, like Article 41 and all the articles we just talked about, could those either be
We'll make sure those get
provided or some
attached.
sort of, yeah.
Yep, no problem.
Awesome.
Got that, Ruby? Awesome.
Okay, so before we wrap up, which it looks like we're about to, we'll, based on all the input we received today, we'll rephrase a lot of this stuff and put it into a format that a motion can be made. And then I do want to touch upon the items. Well, we really didn't get into activity records, but also with track and trace at the state level, weights and measures, and then the rest of it, I guess we can continue to talk about in-house. But I thought maybe, Catherine Vanderwall might be able to help out with weights and measures and what the ag department requires. And maybe I could work with Nara on the track and trace stuff. So I can reach out to you guys individually, separately over the next 2 weeks, maybe touch base to make sure we're covering everything that needs to be covered, in case we can make a quick motion next time and move on to the next item.
Good.
So could we also, just put the whole darn ordinance on this so that if we get further than what's just on there, we can continue rolling through it? It's just,
I will do my best. This, in a sense, one, it was looking at, we didn't get through what limited stuff I put up here. And then two, our internal capacity is at a challenging moment at the moment, place at the moment. So, yeah, I will do everything I possibly can.
Cool. Awesome, Andrew. Thank you. Is there any last hands raised in Zoom before we adjourn?
Nope, not at the moment. So.
Okay, we're adjourning. Thanks, everybody. In 2 weeks. Oh, and we're going to start putting the date of the next meeting on the agendas too.
Oh, yes.
Can you make notes on that?
Yes.
Okay, I do.